About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
Welcome to Noetic Moments, the show that explores the research addressing what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be very different if we understood it better. I am Ruth Miller, a longtime student of consciousness, cybernetics, and culture, and through this series of programs, I'm introducing some of the people whose work has defined this field of research, and I'm explaining some of their ideas and experiments. I'll also explore some relevant news items and answer questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org. And Noetic is spelled Noetic. Now, over the course of these programs, we've looked at some of the models developed to explain our mental and emotional experience and the experiments that have supported them. We learned that although the medical world defines consciousness as what we're aware of now, most of what goes on in the mind is not in our conscious awareness at all, but goes on in unconscious processes. From Jung and Freud and other early researchers, we learned that our minds can be thought of as having three aspects: what we are aware of, or our personal awareness, usually called the conscious mind; what we aren't aware of, that keeps our bodies going and includes our fears and our beliefs about threats and dangers, which we'll call the subconscious mind; and what we aren't aware of, that connects and guides us in our actions, the superconscious mind. We then learned that we can change our state of consciousness and shift which aspects of mind we're aware of and what we're capable of, moment to moment. From neuroscientists, we learned that the brain modifies whatever it receives, from both the bodily senses and the mind, to fit past patterns of experience, following Begg's principle that neurons that fire together wire together and form what's called the default network in the brain. This means that we see and hear and feel what we expect or believe we will experience. We also learned that while it's possible to say where in the brain various processes are active, no one has yet been able to pinpoint where memories are stored or how ideas and thoughts are formed. We then saw that many responses in our body happen faster than nerve impulses or chemicals can travel through the body, and often show up in the body before we are aware of it. As a result, many scientists have come to accept that what we call mind is not the product of the electrochemical activity of the brain, but is, in fact, the activity of a field that surrounds and permeates the whole body. The brain, then, would be best understood as a receiver-transmitter, receiving messages from the mind and transmitting them to the rest of the body, and receiving messages from the senses and transmitting them to the rest of the body and the mind. Some experiments have demonstrated that a person's mind continues to perceive and process for as much as several hours, even when the brain and heart are flatlined and the person has been declared dead. Mind, then, is a field, a pattern of energy that exists regardless of whether the body is functioning, permeates and develops with the body and the brain, as it is told by the senses through the brain what the body's experiences of the world is like. This field, that we call mind, appears to be at least partly electromagnetic because it is possible to measure electromagnetic activity for several inches and for some folks several feet around the body. And some researchers and teachers of ancient traditions, who we call shamans, say that the field looks like a glowing egg shape, extending from below our knees to a few inches above our heads. Now, every field is a unique pattern of vibration that's different from other fields, and some experiments have demonstrated that minds can vibrate along similar patterns. They resonate with each other. Such resonant minds are able to sense when one is focusing attention on them, and their bodies, and some of their pets' bodies, have been measured as changing when someone they're connected with turns attention their way, even though they can't see or hear them doing so. These experiments help explain how the belief of a care provider in a treatment can help a patient receiving that treatment experience healing and what's called the placebo effect. We've learned that mind affects energy and matter in a variety of other ways as well. For example, in the famous double-slit experiments in quantum physics, the subatomic building blocks of the universe show up as energy or matter, depending on whether a mind is present to observe them. For decades now, individuals have changed the patterns of numbers in what should be random grids on their computer screens or printouts. And the collective mind seems to change the readouts from random number generators on a broad network of computers run by the Global Consciousness Project in Princeton. Because of the nature of fields, and because of things like the Global Consciousness Project, a growing number of scientists are seeing our individual field of mind as part of a larger field, what Jung called a collective consciousness, Teilhard de Chardin called a noosphere, and others call a global brain. And more scientists are equating mind with the quantum or zero-point field out of which all matter and energy arises, Irvin Laszlo calling it the Akashic field, using the Sanskrit term for the essence of everything that exists in the material world. We also heard from a neurologist and a physicist who are using the equations that describe aspects of quantum mechanics, relativity, and computer learning algorithms to describe the role of consciousness in the formation of our material world. With these understandings, we explored some currently popular ideas of how the mind works, including the law of attraction, how the world around us mirrors what our consciousness is focusing on, including insight, intuition, and channeling as ways to access information in the quantum or Akashic field, including how dreams affect the body and the overall consciousness, and how music affects the brain and the body and our connections with other fields of mind. These past few weeks, we've been looking at the role of mind and our state of consciousness in the healing process, and the ways we can enhance or slow down healing through our thoughts, emotions, and visualizations. You can catch up on our past shows on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you'll also find links to the clips and books and authors that I mention. Well, I thought we'd take a shift because some interesting developments have been occurring with regard to remote viewing. Now, to give you a bit of a review on that, we'll go to this exploration of it on YouTube.
Remote viewing is the ability to perceive details of a location or an activity that is otherwise shielded to you by it being distant or it being remote in time or space.
What makes remote viewing unique and testable?
Remote viewing is done under controlled conditions. The person who's doing the viewing is blind to the nature of what they're looking at. And it's important that there be an actual thing that you are viewing, and so you need to be able to get feedback at the end to have a loop closure, essentially.
Do you get visions, or how does the information come to you?
It's more of a general perception that's happening. You're getting all sorts of different kinds of detail about the location or the thing that you're looking at. It's not coming in a nice, clean, orderly, visual way.
Is remote viewing an extra sense?
It is a sense that every human being has to varying degrees. The ability or the aptitude for it is distributed in the general population, probably something like musical inclination is. Some people can't play a violin to save their life. Other people, they're 4 years old and they're up on stage and they're blowing your mind.
Okay, that's what remote viewing is. Being able to focus one's inner awareness in a way that allows general perceptions, not necessarily a very clear picture of a particular location and the features of that location that one can then draw or describe in a way that others can identify as being what you are seeing. This was a technique that was developed and applied during the 1970s, first at a laboratory at Stanford Research Institute, and then interest in what was going on in the Soviet Union through the book Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain and other material, was adopted by the CIA as a top secret technique. Now, I'm going to let a woman who was involved in the statistical analysis of that time talk about her experience.
During that time, there were two programs going on. There was a very highly classified program where we were using psychics to spy on our enemies, and there was the research program going on, which had a lower secret classification, and that was going on at SRI International, and that was where I was working as a statistician. So we would bring people in and do controlled experiments to see whether or not it would work statistically.
What is the essence of that paper that you wrote for Congress in 1995, and what were the important conclusions that you came to?
It was actually a team of two of us, and the other guy was a well-known skeptic. So the two of us were asked to look at the scientific evidence, the statistical evidence, and what I did is I looked at the evidence not just from the government laboratories, but other laboratories around the world that were studying the same kind of thing. And what I found was amazing consistency across all of the different laboratories that were studying this. And that doesn't happen if it's just a fluke. And so what I found was overwhelming statistical evidence, the 10 to a billion or whatever, against chance for the data just by combining the data across the laboratories. The skeptic who was working with me agreed that there was overwhelming statistical evidence. He just didn't agree on what was causing it, but he had no alternative explanation.
So that was an interview with a professor at the University of California at Irvine who was involved in the statistical analysis of many remote viewing experiments across many labs. And her conclusion was there is no way statistically that remote viewing could possibly be a chance endeavor. Now, the really interesting thing for me today is that just this week, an online YouTuber has had some results from an experiment that he was trying, and I'm going to let him report the results of his experiment.
We just proved that remote viewing is true. We just proved that psychic functioning and psychic awareness is possible even without training. We held a contest titled Think Inside the Box. I put an object inside this box and I put a lock on it, and the goal was to get the numbers of the lock and describe what's in the box. And today I'm going to open the box and show it to you, and I'm going to show you the winning submissions. Some of you did an excellent job. For chain of custody, I put this object in the box. I didn't tell anyone except one person who was our control person in Florida. That person knew what was in the box, didn't share with anyone. So this was done with good chain of custody. We got entries from all over the world, and I'm thrilled with the results, and I think you're going to like it too. Okay, let's look at the top entries. We start with Dietmar, who says Dietmar used intuition, no formal remote viewing training, but Dietmar draws an animal with a smiley face, arms in the air, with two large ears. So that's Dietmar's submission. Next we go to Elisar, who used what is described as a form of lazy remote viewing right to the source. Well, Elisar is giving us an animal which is described as a figurine. And you'll note that in this picture, it looks like a drum. You would AOL a drum, but if we take it down to a basic gestaltic level, analytically, we would say that there is an object in front of the figurine that has a repeating pattern on it. All right? So our next entry comes from Zach, which is, he AOL's a teddy bear, but if we look at it just gestaltically, and again, Zach says he used intuition. He says, I don't know what I was tapping into, but I'm giving you what I got when I sat down and concentrated on the box. So Zach got his mind right and drew an animal with two ears And note there is something around the neck. He draws it as a bow tie, but some neck ornament. All right, so the overlapping gestalts here are an animal, particularly an animal with two large ears, arms doing something. Sasha is a trained remote viewer and a very good one. She is part of our Hawaii remote viewing training group. And sometimes women get words and emotions and concepts more than visuals. Sasha says, this feels Asian. It's related to good fortune, wealth, and luck. And she gives us colors of jade green, Chinese red, gold, and black, but only a little bit of black. And she also draws two sort of amulets. Those are the top entries. That is a figurine, and it's related to an Asian good fortune, wealth, and luck symbol. The big reveal. Let's open the lock, all right? And here it is. It is a Japanese good luck cat. And we wanted the colors to be gold, red, green, and black.
All right, then. Several thousand people attempted to figure out what was in the box, and at least 3 people drew a drawing and or wrote a description that came very close to the figurine in the box. And as our first interview suggested, this is because we all have this capability when we allow ourselves to turn off the default network in our brain that tells us we can't do this sort of thing and use that inner awareness and extend it wherever we point it to discover what is there. There are lots of things online for learning how to do remote viewing. I did a show on it earlier that suggested some guidelines for accomplishing it, but I thought you might be interested in knowing that the most recent public experience testing remote viewing has actually demonstrated that it is possible. Well, if you just tuned in, you are listening to Noetic Moments, the show that explores what consciousness is, what it does, and how our lives could be better if we understood it more fully. I'm Ruth Miller, and that sound tells me we need to look at what's going on in the world today and what you, the listeners, are curious about. All right, well, let's look at a book, and it seems appropriate that we would look at the book that's called Real Magic. It's written by Dean Radin. Now, those of you who have been following the show are aware that Dean Radin is was the director of science, director of research. Now he's the senior scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and he's written a number of books. He is a statistician. He will not consider something unless it's several thousand times chance, the possibility that something will happen. And this book, Real Magic, was published in 2018, and it has a subtitle that's kind of cool. The subtitle of the book is Ancient Wisdom, Modern Science, and a Guide to the Secret Power of the Universe. As I say, it was published in 2018 by Harmony Books, which is a division of Penguin, and it has only 9 chapters. The beginning, Science and Magic, ? Magical Potpourri, Origins of Magic, Practice of Magic, Scientific Evidence, Merlin-class magicians, and Chapter 8, Toward a Science of Magic, with Chapter 9 being Concluding Thoughts. Now, he offers a preface which is written from the perspective of a few centuries from now, looking back. But if we look at Chapter 1, he says, this book is about magic, not the fictional magic of Harry Potter, or the feigned magic of Harry Houdini, or the fraudulent magic of con artists. Not blue lightning bolts springing from the fingertips, aerial combat on broomsticks, sleight of hand tricks, or any of the other elaborations of artistic license and special effects. This is about real, emphasized, magic. Then he says, occultists sometimes use the Old English spelling magic with a K to distinguish fictional and stage magic from the real deal. We'll use the more common term magic without the K to avoid unnecessary associations with the occult. He goes on to say real magic falls into 3 categories: mental influence of the physical world, and we've talked about that in our review. His second point, perception of events distant in space and time, what we were just talking about right now in remote viewing. And then the third is interactions with non-physical entities, and we will talk about that in the future. Now, he says the first type, mental influence on the physical world, he says the first type I'll call force of will. It's associated with spell casting and other techniques meant to intentionally influence events or actions. The second is divination. It's associated with practices such as reading tarot cards and mirror gazing. And the third is theurgy, Theurgy, from the Greek meaning God work. It involves methods for evoking and communicating with spirits. And then he goes on to talk about how, even though it's not in the textbooks, there's a very large body of scientific work associated and exploring this stuff. And he says, while science as a practice has primarily concentrated on the objective world, scientific methods are extremely powerful. So if we wish, we can redirect our lens to look inward and explore what consciousness is capable of, which is what this show is all about. So Dean goes on to say, when we do that, we are startled to find whole new realms of knowledge. One of the consequences of taking this inner perspective is that the idea of magic transforms from an impossible fantasy into an aspect of nature that we can begin to study. And then he goes on, we'll explore this new realm of knowledge through 2 major themes. First, based on a substantial body of experimental evidence, we can state with a high degree of confidence that real magic exists. Second, he says there are rising trends in science suggesting that what was once called magic is poised to evolve into a new scientific discipline. And he points out this is just like medieval and astrology, alchemy, evolving into today's astronomy and chemistry. His next section in the first chapter is called Magic is Everywhere, and he reports a number of examples in a variety of scientific and anecdotal experiences, quoting various people. The next section in that first chapter is Power, and then he says where we're headed. And then he says, we'll survey a potpourri of magical topics, from popular culture to the scholarly study, why magic is both terrific and terrifying, etc. Chapter 2, Science of Magic, ? He says, I've been studying magic from a scientific perspective for about 40 years. For the first 39 of those years, I would have vigorously denied that statement. He talked about his formal education in physics, electrical engineering, and psychology. He was at various graduate schools, and he was intrigued by all kinds of things. And he says, I focused on the relationships between the brain, the mind, and consciousness. Of those 3 factors, I found consciousness to be the most interesting because it raises a baffling problem. How does the 3-pound lump of neural tissue inside my head give rise to the awareness that I call me? And he says, what is consciousness? Where does it come from? What's its purpose? No one knows. But he does say, what we do know, without consciousness, there'd be no you to experience the act of reading this sentence. He talks about normal psychological approaches. He talks about our social taboos against the experiences that people have that are not allowed in a materialist understanding. He points out that even in 2005, nearly 75% of Americans believe in at least one, quote, paranormal, unquote, phenomenon, like psi, but a mere 0.001% of academic scientists are actively studying it. Chapter 3 talks about some of the books that people are reading, interested in. He talks about scholarly books that have been written over the years. And he says that real magic is awesome because from a scientific perspective, magic provides valuable clues about who and what we are and what we may be capable of. So here's a marvelous book exploring some of the capabilities that we all have, and it's just one more contribution to the material that I've been sharing with you all along here to help us understand what we're doing when we're just simply being alive. It's so cool. Now, I've already shared with you the big news, and that is that someone has publicly demonstrated that just your normal person on the street can, in fact, see what's inside a locked box. And this last couple of months, I've been doing my workshop on the understanding the healing process, and people are beginning to realize what we've been saying here, and that is that the brain's signals to the body are not necessarily helping the body be well. And we need to change the signals from the brain to the body so that the brain can be part of the body's perfect capacity to heal itself. That medications are one way. There are other ways that help to realign the brain so that it is telling the body what's needed. And we can use our consciousness, our awareness, our deeper thinking process, not the surface one, that accesses the inner processes of the body. We can use that to help reframe what the brain is telling the body and therefore allow the body to heal itself. Yes. And I'm available to do this workshop or anything like it for anyone at any time if we can make arrangements to get me there and cover the costs. So let me know if that's something you would like to know more about. All right. That's it for today's show. The next time we get together, we'll look at more of the research being done in an attempt to understand what consciousness is, what it really does, and how we can experience life differently when we use our consciousness fully. We are out of time for today, but remember, you can always continue the exploration on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you will find the titles and other resources we refer to on the show, alongside the archived past shows, and where you can send me your comments and questions, which I'll do my best to get answered the next time we're on the air. For now, thank you for joining me here on Noetic Moments, recorded in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon. And have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.